Okay, why don't we get started? I know people are going to come in, but in the interest of staying on schedule for everybody, um, my name is Roy Kessel. I'm the founder of the Sports Philanthropy Network, and today we are very excited to have with us Melissa Lagowski. Melissa from Big Buzz Idea Group is going to talk to us about building your ideal board of directors, and we're going to turn it over to her in just a minute. But first I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to come and join us today. It's a great opportunity to learn, and board of directors have such an enormous impact on how an organization functions and operates. So for Sports Philanthropy Network, we're excited to offer this opportunity for you to learn and participate in this environment. We've got some very exciting things coming up at Sports Philanthropy Network over the next few weeks. We've got our big event called Sports Philanthropy World, which is going to be June 28th and June 29th virtually. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go and participate before, make sure you sign up, and some great speakers. We're getting more confirmed every day. Fantastic groups, including former NFL Commissioner Paul Tagliabue, some NBA star players, one of the owners of the Phoenix Suns, executive VP of the NHL, Kim Davis, and many, many others. So it's going to be a terrific event. Last year we had 30 countries represented, over 430 people, and over 325 organizations. So we know that there's going to be great people involved in the event. So I hope you'll join us there. Make sure you follow us on social media, and you can see all the great things going on in the network. Fantastic work by different organizations. I know I'm in a place with a little bit more background noise than normal, so I will mute out. But if you have questions, please put them into the chat, and I'll make sure that we get those answered and covered. I want to make sure that we maximize the time for Melissa, and she can go through her presentation, and then I'll moderate things. So I will mute out so there is less background noise, but I will hop on with Melissa and go through some of the questions and any other discussions. So feel free to drop those in the chat. Thanks for joining us. So Melissa, we're very excited to have you with us today. We know you've done an amazing job training organizations how they can be more effective in using their board of directors to make an impact on their communities, and really creating a strong board of directors. So thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Roy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and always excited to help nonprofit organizations be able to do better. I originally was an executive director myself, starting in 1999, and I was very excited about the opportunity. It was very funny. It was a lengthy interview process with the board. And once I was selected, I was greeted at the door of the office by the president of the organization. I was handed the keys. He opened the door and he said, "Okay, go for it." And I was like, "But wait, what do I do?" And so I like to say that I'm kind of a case study in how to do everything the hard way. And so now I have created Big Buzz to be able to help nonprofit organizations be able to do things better, to try to provide regular education and information to help you thrive within your organizations. And I think that this board development piece is something that absolutely more organizations need to really focus on and go after with a lot of intention. So I hope today everybody will have some great takeaways, and we should have a lot of time at the end for questions, and happy to follow up with people as needed too. I always love to answer questions and be available as a resource to anybody. So with that, when I started in 1999, I was working for an organization that had been founded in 1946. And one of the original board members that 53 3 years later was still serving on the board. So, it was really interesting. The shortest board member had been there for at least 10 years. And so there wasn't really a lot of freshness to the board. It was a little bit stale. They wanted to really just keep doing what they had always been doing. But the community that we were serving was very much changing. And there was a lot of innovation and new businesses coming in. And so doing things the same old way really wasn't right for the organization. And it proved to be particularly challenging because I just had trouble getting the board to really see things differently or to look through a different perspective. I think that it's a good opportunity to kind of talk about these types of situations. And while everybody there was very much dedicated and committed to the organization, but they really had just lost some of their perspective. And so I think one of the things to really think about is, you should have established bylaws, you should have term limits, and you should have really the length of each term that a board member can serve. And I think that these are some of the types of things we're going to talk about today so that you are having an ideal board to support your efforts, because ultimately the board is very instrumental in the success of your organization, and it really is a partnership, and it really should be viewed as supporting the executive director and the staff, and really being able to lift up your organization to the highest level possible. So these are good lessons to learn from. Board number 2 that I was introduced to in my tenure, we had 2 leaders. One was a past president and one was the current president, and they had a falling out that unfortunately became very public and divided the organization. The organization landed in a significant amount of debt that almost buried and defeated the organization. The work that the board members in the boardroom were doing was actually beneath the leaders. So it was a business organization where all of the participants were business owners, but the work they were being asked to do was very menial, and it really was just not at the highest level to meet the level of expertise of those board members. And it really ended up resulting in a lot of partial terms. We had a lot of turnover, and the organization, because everybody was a leader in their own business, we had what I like to call too many chiefs in the kitchen, too many cooks in the kitchen, too many chiefs on the team. And it was really difficult for people to kind of be able to work collaboratively in the way that you need to as a nonprofit board. And they had scattered initiatives. They were not very clear on their goals. They were not really all focused on the same kind of one vision, one mission, one team kind of concept that I think really helps organizations to thrive. Fast forward to board number 3 in 2018. I was served as an executive director for an organization that had no leadership pipeline. All of the board members would immediately come in and they would immediately fast track to be the president of the organization. This is another common thing that we see within a lot of our clients, that it's not uncommon that people have trouble finding the leaders they need when they need them. And so people end up being able to kind of fast track to the top of the totem pole. And that's just not ideal. You really want people to be able to have a term in your boardroom to get familiar with the organization, get familiar with the roles and the responsibilities, how you operate, and then perhaps work their way into leadership. You also want to be able to have an opportunity to see how people work on committees or as a general board member or director at large before they become the key leader for your organization. There's so many things that you can learn from observing and working with someone prior to taking over that role. And so it starts to be really important that you are evaluating that. Again, the work was beneath the leaders. They were not leaning on the staff appropriately. They didn't have the right staff in place. I don't think that the job descriptions existed, but they were just not being adhered to properly. They started to have a shared vision. And the one beautiful thing about that particular board is that they had strong servant leadership. I'm not sure how many of you have a lot of board experience or if you're relatively new to board development, but this concept of servant leadership is incredibly important, that anybody that sits at your board table, they should be coming with the purest of heart, meaning that they are there to serve your organization. And different individuals have a lot of different motives. I think that I've seen some people where, you know, they really are just trying to kind of grow their way and use organizations as stepping stones to higher level positions with other boards. Some people, you know, whatever it might be, they have strong egos and maybe it's a little bit of a personal gain situation. I hate to say that because you really want to believe that everybody who comes to serve on a board is there with a pure heart, but it's not always true. This particular board did have strong servant leadership, though. They were all very focused on the mission and vision of the organization and knew that's why they were there. And so this particular group, while they had some problems, they started to be able to have good conversations, hard conversations, right? The conversations where they disagreed, but they could do it in a very respectful and constructive manner so that they started to fix what was wrong in the organization. And that allows us to fast forward to board number 4, which is the same organization in 2020. And they now have a leadership pipeline that's been rebuilt. They now actually have their next series of officers starting to evolve. They're starting to have enough people that are sitting at the board table on an annual basis that they can start to advance some of them and start grooming them and prepping them for future leadership roles in a meaningful way. They are still maintaining that shared vision, very, very clear on what their purpose is and what they're trying to accomplish, and realizing that your purpose generally should never change with a new board. Sometimes boards will come in and they think to make their mark, you have to have a whole new series of initiatives and goals, and everything about your group should change. But the reality is that your mission and vision are generally very well set, and you should have a strategic plan that is not drastically changing from year to year, but rather that you keep tweaking so that you're getting closer to your goals or growing your goals and making more of an impact. And with the right leaders at the table, you'll start to see this happen, and it's a beautiful thing when it does. We're very proud that this particular organization now has their members serving full terms in their board positions. They also have reached almost the maximum number of board members that their bylaws allow for. They really went for a quality over quantity process, and are excited that they are also now getting it stretched. In the past, people did not want to become leaders in the organization because they viewed it as a huge requirement. They viewed it as a large hit on their time, and they didn't think that they could commit to that. But now when you get all of the roles defined and the responsibilities outlined appropriately, it's not a huge demand on their time, and they're able and more excited to participate and to be able to then start to, again, build that pipeline to get people in line. And they remain very strong in their servant leadership, which again, I think is just an incredible thing when you are working with an ideal board. So what does it mean for you to create your ideal board? I think that today we're going to walk through a little bit about, you know, kind of how I think some best practices around really being intentional in what you want to create. Again, it's really important that you start with your bylaws and really review them and know them. I again, you know, that showing up on that day, that fall day in 1999, when I was just handed the keys, I wasn't even instructed what bylaws were. And bylaws really should outline an awful lot of the details and the framework for your board of directors. And they should be evaluated regularly. They should be reviewed regularly. And you want to use that as your guide. But then there are other criteria that sometimes need to get flushed out. If it's not in your bylaws, you should definitely have a nominating committee. You should definitely know who's going to be recruiting for your board process. We actually have issued a couple of newsletters recently that go a little bit more in depth about even the nominations process and the vetting process, because you should interview your board. I've been on boards and I've seen a lot of boards where they'll take anybody who's got a pulse, and it's because they need to fill the seats. And I see a couple of heads nodding. And, just because somebody's got a pulse, that doesn't mean that they're right for you, your board, or your organization. We work with a lot of chambers of commerce, and I think a great example, right, is that lots of times in a chamber of commerce, they will find local business members to be on their board. The problem is that some of those businesses may be large businesses. And so it may be, maybe it's a floor manager, or maybe it's a bank teller. And those people don't necessarily know how to run a business, but a nonprofit is a business model. It should run like a business. It should be very intentional like a business. And so you need people at the table who really understand that and will have the difficult discussions to really be able to address that.
Melissa, I want to jump in for a minute here, because I think that's really a key point when you talk about the fact that putting people on the board is an important step, right? It's a sign of strength for the organization. And so those are valuable slots, and filling them up just for the sake of filling a certain number of seats, like you have in the photo there, right? You've got 8 seats. So that's a limited inventory. You really want to make sure that those are good people, because you're probably going to be stuck with them for a while, and it's a lot harder to get people off the board than it is to get them onto the board.
That's an excellent point, Roy, and it's very true. And I think that, and you have to look, right, that really in filling those board seats, you want to work with your board president, you want to work with your nominations committee. So again, that if you are very clear on the alignment for your organization, that you start to know who the right people are, and through interviewing, you can also just confirm that they're there for the right reason. Will they add the right skills? I really think it's important that you should be able to test and meet people and watch how they work on a committee within your organization, to then invite the most active to the board, or to even define what that board service, what the requirements are. Different boards have different expectations or responsibilities. And so we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But I think that the first step in building your ideal board is to really start to look at the key skills and the criteria that you need on your team. And I think for a sports-based organization, this makes a lot of sense. You guys, understand these team concepts, and really your board is your team. And so I advise that, you look at the professions that you want to sit at that table. It's generally always advisable to have a lawyer. Lawyers have very specific skills and talents, and they're going to look at things through a certain lens that can really help your organization stay out of trouble and make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, so to speak. You want an accountant or a financial expert at the table. I've sat in a lot of boardrooms where they hand out the financial reports and people aren't trained on what those numbers mean. They don't know what those numbers mean, but they're too embarrassed to speak up and really say that they don't know how to read financial statements, or they don't know what's being, what the story is that the numbers are telling. And so having an accountant or a financial representative who can explain the numbers in a meaningful way to your average board member becomes really important for your organization to stay financially solvent. And one of the largest roles of your board is to manage good governance, which includes your fiscal financial responsibilities. So that accountant and finance piece is really important.
So Melissa, I've got a good question here from Danielle, and she asks, if you're creating an initial board for your organization, how do you decide who is on your nominating or vetting committee, right? Because it's usually just you starting the organization for a new group. So what does that process look like in terms of creating a set of procedures or policies for a new organization?
Yeah, so again, you should have those bylaws created, and you definitely need to look at your state requirements, because some states also have a mandate of what your minimum number of board members are. And I think as we go through this, you'll get some ideas about what your a first board might need to look like. And as you go through time, when you have that nominations committee, the concept around putting some of your past presidents, past leaders, it's a great opportunity to keep people still tied to your organization and give them a meaningful role in developing the future leaders. So when you have people who did it really well, they're going to also be able to help you vet the next go round. And your board is much like your staff at an organization or in a business. You should, like the nominating committee, your processes should interview these candidates and really, again, take the best. And when you have an ideal situation, you'll have competition for your seats. You'll get to choose and select. But we still, even without necessarily, again, I encourage that quality over quantity, as long as you're meeting any minimum requirements for your organization. Because the other thing that is really important is that you want those people who are going to contribute. You want those people who are going to be able to make a difference. And other roles that I think you want to consider, and you can kind of pick and choose from some of your basics out of this list, but marketing, design, creation, having somebody or a business in that area can be very helpful. Technology can be useful. A writer, somebody who can help make your ideas, your events, your projects come to life, or your newsletters and what have you, can be a really great addition. For some organizations, maybe not this group in particular, but you might want somebody who's got some political savvy. Some are more political minded, some need that, some don't. A strategic thinker or a planner can be very good. A creative person, maybe an event person if you're going to be doing fundraising and events. And some organizations also need somebody with lived experience. If they have a particular demographic that they serve, then they might need somebody who has recovered or can speak to what the audience they're serving looks like or might be experiencing, and have that representation. Again, I don't know that that's going to apply to this group, but that's the type of thinking you want to do when you're looking at this. I think it's incredibly important always to ensure diversity. This is something that I've always focused on. And I think diversity for every organization comes in a variety of ways. I think gender, I think back to that first board I was on in 1999, there was one single female. And, they're just, it changed the conversation. So really looking at how you blend the genders of your board members is important. Race and ethnicity, age, business industry. Again, we work with a lot of chambers. So if you think about different business sizes, different business types, maybe even a geography, if you serve an entire area, you want to start to look at, do you have representations from all of the corners of your particular geographical region? Because you don't want anyone to feel left out. You don't want it to feel unbalanced, like you're playing favorites to one side of town or one part of your geographical arena. And then again, sometimes having that lived experience for certain organizations can be really important. And I chose to share this quote: gender and racially diverse teams perform better, innovate more, and improve economic equality. And this was part of even the term limits and the changeover in your board and how that shifts over time really is so incredibly powerful, because that first organization in 1999 that had a lot of not proper practices or not advisable best practices at all, but they got stale. They got stale in their perspective. Members didn't want to, while the old guard was still joining, but the new businesses coming in and the new industry, and then they wanted more innovation. They wanted to have a new voice. They wanted to do different things. The age was starting to skew younger of the members of that organization. And so really looking at how your organization might be changing and what you want to do to represent all of the diverse segments within your group, incredibly important as you plan for the long term. I think one of the most important things that everybody can do is find people who are really devoted to your mission. Passion is energy. Feel the power that comes from focusing on what excites you is what Oprah Winfrey said. And the most important thing is that, again, you can find people who have a pulse, but when you find the people who show up to all the committee meetings, or you find the people who are, getting excited about what you're doing, or asking how, the volunteers even who want to do more or are following up with you and really seeing their assigned tasks through in a nice way, they start to become the people that usually have a little bit more, skin in the game, and they tend to want to give a little bit more and give back. So really looking at finding those people, and again, that comes in the interview process, in how you find those people that are most devoted to your mission, and be able to really fill your board with people who get excited by what you're doing, because that is going to help your organization soar. I've been on a lot of boards where people show up on a monthly basis to make the minimum commitment, and what they do outside of that boardroom is very, very minimal. But when you find the ones who really feel the passion of your organization in their heart and in their veins, you're going to get more interaction, more engagement, and more success all the way around. I think that it becomes really important to talk about, with the candidates, what the time requirement is for your organization. You want to be clear about the time that is required. The more you can outline the requirements and talk about the days and times of your meetings, again, making sure, because if you're talking to somebody and they would be a great candidate, but they have a conflict that already is on their calendar, the day and the time that your organization board meets every month, they're never going to be able to show up. So, that starts to put you at a disadvantage right out of the gate. So I think it's important that you know what that looks like. You want to ask about their other obligations. Sometimes people have conflicts of interest. They may be in similar organizations or competing organizations. I generally believe that there's enough in the world for all of us, and that there's not real competition out there, but sometimes there are in different situations. And so making sure you're asking about some of those questions on the front end, so you're not surprised on the back end, is really important, because as you get into like development and fundraising and what have you, you don't want your leads being shared with a competitor. You don't necessarily want, your board member doing double time and that sort of thing, and it could actually hurt you in the long run. You want to ask about their work conflicts. What does their work schedule look like? Do they work, again, do they work during the time that your board normally meets, or when your events and activities are? I've seen some boards where they're very engaged and really amazing people, but unfortunately they don't show up to any of the events. And I think a good board member is going to show up to your events and participate. So making sure that those events are at times that, their work and their other responsibilities don't conflict is important. What family conflicts might they have? What are their ongoing family plans? Are their children in a lot of activities that could be counterproductive to what you need from them? Do they have certain trips that they make on an annual basis, so that, again, something like your board retreat doesn't get planned when they may already be scheduled out of town? And then, do they have any other annual rituals, trips, activities that might, again, remove them or limit their ability to show up and participate with your organization? It doesn't mean that this makes them not a good candidate, but it does mean that you will at least go in with a firm understanding of where they've got some bend, where they might not have as much flexibility, and being able to evaluate on the front end if it's okay for you to bend to meet them where they're at, or if it might not be the right fit.
So Melissa, I think that it's really important that you brought that up, because we've all been on boards where there's the person who says yes to every board that they're invited to, right? And then they don't have enough bandwidth to really contribute in a meaningful way to each of those boards. And then the other thing is, you talked about the dates of meetings, the dates of events. Most organizations set those pretty far in advance, and so it's relatively easy to have that conversation up front. Do you recommend that the bylaws include provisions relating to missed meetings and missed events, or is that something that's more informal in terms of a list of expectations?
So we're going to talk a little bit about expectations, and if your bylaws do not already have that stated, then you may want a organizational policy around that, because I think it's very important to set that on the front end. And I think that as we move into kind of talking about expectations of your board members, it becomes incredibly important that, again, we like to recommend that you get an outline in writing of what they are expected to fulfill. One board I'm currently part of, the one that I described that's thriving and really working well, they have to sign during the nominations process. We share an outline of what the expectations are. And then once they've actually been nominated and approved to be on the board, and we go into the board retreat, every single board member around the table signs that document again, because board members forget. We're all very, 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 very busy people. I mean, you, me, the board members, everybody, right? And so they just genuinely might forget. And so sometimes we do have to remind them. We do a scorecard whereby we just keep a running tally for each of our board members about how they're doing on reaching their goals in each of the key areas. And we share that with them a couple of times a year, usually quarterly. And that way they know how they're performing. They know what they still have to do to meet the commitment that they made to the organization, and just really hold them accountable. And I think some of those expectations, I'm sorry, Roy, you have something else?
No, go ahead. Finish up your thought there.
I was just going to go into this next slide. So if you
Yeah,
have
so that, I think what I really like about the fact that you're doing that annually is I think it's really important, because as you talked about boards that get stale, or people that have been on a board for a long time and you're not getting that new lifeblood. But part of things that happen is life changes. So somebody came on a board and they signed this set of expectations 5 years ago, maybe at a point in their life where some of these things were not a problem and they easily could meet the expectations and requirements, whether it's because they had kids, or they got married, or they switched jobs. And so asking them to review it and sign it annually just keeps that fresh in their mind, so that they're able to reaffirm that commitment and help adjust the expectation for you being the executive director or the rest of the board, in terms of where they might not be able to comply. And as long as people understand that going in, then you can have a conversation about whether their role on the board can be as effective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Roy. And I mean, with all of us having just come out of the pandemic, right? We've had a couple of board members where, I mean, financially, things really took a hit for their businesses. Things changed. And so there had to be a little bit more grace, if you will, and a change in expectations. And so, you don't want to be unreasonable by any means. And I've even found that even with very good board members, it's amazing to me that 3 months or 6 months in, they just had a different expectation or a misunderstanding. And so it's important for you as leaders in your organization to have those conversations. I know when I was early in my career as an executive director, I hated having to follow up with people. I thought they should know what they're supposed to do. I thought they should remember their commitments. And I thought I was kind of mothering or, micromanaging. And the reality is they're busy. They just don't know unless I bring it up. And so you've got to not be afraid to have those conversations and to be a leader and hold them accountable. You're doing your organization a huge favor. And it's all in how you approach it, as long as you're not super aggressive with going out and how you bring it up, but rather hey, I wanted to check in with you, you signed on this to the board and there were these expectations. And now that we're halfway through the year, this is how you're sitting on those commitments. Is there anything I can do to help you? Can we schedule a call to review these together, or talk about what you need for support, or how you plan to achieve these goals for the year. So it's okay to open it up and just have some soft conversations around it to, again, just hold them accountable and not seem like a big bully in how you approach it. Some of the other categories that I think make really great items in your board expectation listing as you are going out for nominations and recruitment, it's important that you don't make it seem so overwhelming that people are like, oh my gosh, that's too much and I can't do it. But again, how many board meetings, how many absences are they able to have? You know, what are the additional events that you expect them to be at? Maybe it's not all of your events. Maybe you have 50 events a year and that's too many, but maybe you have 2 big ones and you really do expect board participation at those, or even board recruitment for additional tickets and table purchases. So being able to include that is very helpful. Is there a give-get? You know, a lot of organizations have a minimum financial contribution that they expect their board members to make. And if your board members can't make that financial contribution, can they help you secure new sponsors who can provide that contribution? So that's the give-get. You can either personally give it, or you can get a sponsor or another company to pay it for, you know, on like pay it. And that counts as long as you're doing the recruiting. So that's a really important one. What additional fundraising support might there be that you have for your organization? Are there program contributions that are needed? Do they have to lead a certain discussion or give a workshop or, you know, that type of program or project throughout the course of the year? For sponsors, one of the components that we encourage all of our clients is to ask every board member for at least 3 sponsor leads in the course of a year of their term. And that is a way to keep trying to identify organizations that are going to be able to help you meet your financial needs and help you grow your contact list. Your board ideally should be helping to open doors for you. And when you find those people who have that passion in their heart for what you do, they're going to be more likely to help you find the connections. And I could go very deep into sponsorship, which I will not do because that is a whole different workshop. And then volunteers, you know, do they need to help you recruit volunteers? Lots of times you need more people to help you get your work done and achieve your mission. And so are they another resource that can help bring people to you in that fashion? Do you expect them to serve on a committee during the course of the year? Do they have to lead a committee? Sometimes board members have additional roles as outlined in the bylaws or in your policy manual. And so just knowing what your committees are accomplishing and working toward and what the committee expectation of your board members are is important. Lots of times they can be a bridge from your boardroom to your committees, and just good liaisons all the way around to make sure everything is staying on track. And then what other ambassador roles do they need to play? Sometimes, you know, the board members become the ones who really help open doors for new members or invite new people into your organization. So looking at what additional, I mean, for, you know, I think some of you in sports programs, I mean, maybe it's school outreach, maybe it's other, you know, partner organization outreach and things of that nature. So just looking at what other relationships might be needed and how your board can help you expand your network, incredibly important. Then I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important to properly evaluate the candidates who have applied. So a good board process really should take about 3 months. You want to identify who's going to be leading that committee. You want to be able to reach out and share the information that you're currently recruiting for the board, and your board members can invite other, you know, other people to participate on the board. You can share that information out in your newsletters, on your social media, and just continue to be able to invite people to participate. A lot of times people get uncomfortable self-nominating or expressing that they have an interest in applying for the board, but you want to have that application and you want to share it far and wide. But you do need to make sure that the committee and your board and your staff and your, you know, your committee chairs are thinking about who could they tap to invite to participate at the board level? Where are you seeing great passion for your organization? Do you have, sponsors that are very actively engaged, and could that help you grow your sponsor relationship? Although you want to be careful as well that you don't have, because they are a sponsor, they should not get a larger say at the table. They still are one voice among your many. So making sure you also have policies for what it looks like for sponsors to serve on your board can be important. And then you want to have an interview process. And again, this starts to get into like, what is the board member's story? Well, how did they come to your organization? Why does your organization matter to them? What vision do they have for your organization? Or what contribution do they think they can make? It's a good way to start to brainstorm how they can enhance the growth of your organization and what that's going to look like.
I think there's some great points that you raised there, Melissa, because one of the challenges that we see with a lot of organizations is the reason they end up with a stale board of directors is because they haven't invested into the process of creating a pool of qualified candidates. And so they finish the year and somebody's term is ending, and they look at the person and they're like, oh, well, Roy really hasn't done anything that much, but we don't have any better options, so we're just going to let him stay. So how does a organization cultivate those prospects? What do you recommend, like over the course of time, so that they're building up a qualified pool that is ready, willing, and eager to get to that level?
I think it really becomes kind of like, any company that you may have worked at, where there's an entry level role, there's a step up and a step up and a step up. So, first becoming an active participant in your organization. If most of you are running sports programs, for example, like, they've got to have some tie to you. Then you invite them to get on a committee. Maybe it's a volunteer. Actually, maybe they start as a volunteer, whether that's on a committee or whether that's just for a role they need to fill. But then the committee, how do they get active on a committee so that they're showing up on a regular basis? Then they become a committee chair. Then the committee chairs get invited into the boardroom, or sometimes your board members, your board directors are actually the chairs of the committees, and they can start to see who they want to groom to become the successor for their role as they move up and then move in somebody else. Sometimes you want to have an assistant committee chair, and that allows you to start grooming people right out of the gate and tapping people that have that interest, that passion, or just the good skill set that you need for that particular task or activity as well. So I really think that, again, trying to be able to bring people up through the ranks, you just can tell so much in the people who actually execute on what they've said they're going to do versus, and I think in nonprofit world, I mean, people come with the best of intentions, right? But they'll say, yeah, I'll do that. I've got that for you, right? But then they drop it. You've got to finish it. You have to take it across the finish line. And so as you start to see those people who really shine, those people who introduce you to sponsors before they're on the board, if they're doing that already, man, like, let's get them in here as a leader on this team. And so really just continuing to look at like what those roles are that you need, talking to your board about who they know and how they think they could invite people who have those skill sets or that knowledge that you want to engage. Also very important as you're doing that recruitment.
If you were recommending to an organization that's trying to find the right number of candidates per opening, how many people do you think that they should target for getting into that pool? If they've got one opening, is that 3 people, 5 people, 20 people?
That's an interesting question, and probably one of the most difficult to answer, because it depends. The organization that I talked about that's got that ideal board where people are starting to get in line, it's a beautiful thing that as we've outlined the requirements, we've had a couple of people self-select, like, I can't go forward. And so when they meet those criteria and they actually understand the expectations and still apply, they're already kind of pre-vetting themselves. And so we don't actually need to have more than one person per slot. It's pretty rare. We did have one candidate 2 years ago that actually was denied the opportunity, but given some constructive feedback about what they should go do and then come back and apply again in the future, because they just hadn't had quite enough experience yet. And the board wanted to see the nominating committee wanted them to have a little bit more experience first. So, but for some organizations, if you've just got applicants coming from all over and you haven't given them a list of criteria and that's not being shared until they're in the interview, then it can be a lot more work for everybody. And you might need 3 applicants for one position to find the right candidate. But I think if you're really helping people start to self-select along the way, it starts to be a lot easier.
So we have a question from Brett, and he's saying, where can you look for candidates? So if you've got a new organization and you're just getting started, what's your recommendations for how to identify candidates?
That's a great question. I think it becomes really important. Hopefully you're not starting the organization all by yourself. You've got some fans, you've got some friends, you've got some business contacts. But I think, again, I look at it as a first step is identifying who you need, what skills you need to round out your board. Again, I think legal, accounting, technology, for a lot of you, you might need sports experience, or there might be something in that realm that becomes, applicable to what you're doing. And so you want to look at what those basic needs are. And I know, like in Illinois, you need a minimum of 3 board members. It's not a lot as you get started and you've got the opportunity to grow, but think about what those most critical pieces are, and then start within your network. If you've got a couple of people that you have already expressed interest in being in this organization with you, then asking them to also tap their network becomes really important. And I think that again, you want to do it right so that hopefully those people are going to be in for the long term and really see this commitment through. I think a lot of times when board members come on and they don't know the expectations, they're surprised, and those surprises are often what make them jump ship midstream. And that's not good for your organization for the long term. So I think that really is important.
So one other question that comes up is, you talked about identifying where to find board members. What's your thought if you've got a new organization or a growing organization of asking donors to be board members?
So I am not opposed to it. I know that one of our clients has a policy whereby they are not supposed to have any sponsors on the board. But again, those people who really know your organization the best, and sometimes it becomes a question, again, people have to understand, I am a person who, when I started Big Buzz, I watched an awful lot of wrongdoing with some nonprofit organizations financially. And I, ever since, have been really focused on integrity and full transparency in the nonprofit arena. And so the thing you have to sometimes think about is that a donor is going to see your full financial picture. I mentioned that one organization that had been left with significant debt. I mean, I'm talking about $100,000 of debt that they had gotten themselves into through a series of events. And sometimes that kind of transparency to a donor can be problematic, but sometimes as long as you're honest and you've talked about that situation so there's no surprises, your donors may want to help you recover, want to help fix those problems. And I've seen organizations have some of their sponsors sit at the table and really been able to work through rough patches and still maintain and grow the financial contributions of their donors and their supporters. So I think, again, as you look at that diversity of your organization, you also want to have a mix. So you would never want to have all donors at the table, but to be able to have that perspective, to be able to have, a representation of that audience, or 1 or 2 seats at your board table reserved for people with that stature or that label is completely, I think, a fine idea. Again, you have to make sure it's not a violation of your bylaws, but I think sometimes those are some of your best supporters.
So Danielle asks a great question, which touches on what you just covered. And maybe the answer is you need to put it in your bylaws if you're concerned about it. But she says, what if a large donor wants to be on the board but isn't the right candidate? How do you handle that?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And so we've been very fortunate. What I've seen a couple of organizations do is, again, they have a limited number of seats. So that is a very nice protection to be able to say, oh, thank you for your interest. I'm so sorry those, seats are full and there's not an opportunity at this time. And, and it just kind of doesn't offend anybody dramatically. So I think you have to really look at that. And I think those have to be honest and open discussions at the board. Again, there's so many different, I think, details around why that person's not a right fit and how you can try to explain that. But I think trying to find the most ideal way to do that, or redirect them and try to get them onto a committee. Lots of times, right? I think we have the ability as leaders to also kind of talk about where maybe there's a greater need or a more ideal fit for that board member. So to be able to talk about, like, our board is full at this time. Hopefully you haven't just advertised for new board members, because that can be difficult, or, but sometimes if they're returning terms, when we talk about these term limits, a lot of organizations I know have 2-year terms, and a board member can fill up to 3 terms before they have to take a year off before they come back. And so lots of times, if you're running well, you'll keep a lot of your board members. You won't have a tremendous amount of change. And so there just may not be room at the table at this time. And that's a nice, easy way to let somebody down gently. But otherwise, try to redirect them. Think about their skill set, think about what they could do, and maybe invite them to do something else, and try to make it sound really important, and explain why you think they'd be ideal there and why you need them there. And that can help redirect some of those folks.
Great, thank you.
We talked a little bit about accountability, but I really think that bringing accountability into your boardroom is important. One of the best discussions that I like to have at the annual retreat is asking the board all together at one time, how do you want to be held accountable? And the example on that scorecard, the first time that we handed out the scorecard, we used to actually share it in the boardroom because we wanted people to see against each other. We thought the competition would help maybe get them interested to outdo one another on fundraising or on recruitment and what have you. It actually backfired, and a couple of board members became very defensive that they felt they weren't performing well enough compared to other board members, and they started to question if they should maintain their seat at the board. And we had no intention of trying to get them off the board, so we had to really do some backpedaling, and we stopped sharing it in the group at that time. And instead, everybody said, I do want to see my scorecard individually throughout the course of the year. And that's how we adapted the program. So, you live and learn. I mean, you're not going to do everything right, and that's okay. But asking them how they want to be held accountable, and sometimes peer to peer at that board table, they're going to offer up a discussion, or one of them is going to challenge one another in a way that you can't always do as the staff member and the executive director. So fostering that conversation, having those people speak to one another in a direct way about how it's going to work best, can often bring out some great processes for you. And and then I think also another accountability process and best practice that we like to do is to distribute a list of action items from the board meeting within 24 hours out to the group, so that they all remember what they're supposed to do and they all can act upon that in time for the between one meeting to the next meeting. Sometimes some of the balls will drop, but reminding people and then checking in with them about what they said they would do and if they've completed it is incredibly important. And the more that you can, you really want to try to kind of let the board handle the things they said they were going to do. And I think lots of times we want to rush to making sure things get done. And sometimes you have to be willing to let some of those balls drop, even though it could be painful, but that's how those board members also are going to be held accountable. If we rush in and do the work for them, they're going to learn that we're always going to fix it or save them. And that's not exactly a best practice. With that, are there any additional questions at this time that we can answer in the few minutes that remain?
Brandon, I know you put something into the chat. Do you want to jump on and ask Melissa that question?
How about if you think you're doing more than the rest of your board, and the rest of your board is doing like nothing?
Well, I think that becomes very challenging. So it depends on the roles and responsibilities. I would start by asking if you have an outline of roles and responsibilities and those expectations. And if you are an all volunteer board, then I think that sometimes, again, that has to be a conversation that you have. I don't know how many people here have heard of Patrick Lencioni, but he has a book. It's a easy read, and it's also an audiobook about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And I think that really looking at, sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations. You have to explain why you can't keep doing what you're doing, or you have to explain, you know, we have a tendency in the nonprofit world to see everything kind of with blinders on through our eyes. And sometimes we're so close to it. If you're the founder, if you've started it, if you're the one who's doing, you know, the lion's share of the work, then you kind of eat, sleep, and breathe it in a way that maybe other people at the table just don't know. And are you effectively communicating with them what's hard, what comes easy, what other skill sets you need, what are your limitations, and are you setting boundaries? We tend to often take on tasks. And one of the things that one past board member told me when I was in my first go round as an ED, I tried to do everything myself. I thought I could do it better. I thought I could do it faster if I just completed it myself. And the board treasurer told me, and I will never forget it. He said, you know, Melissa, sometimes people want to feel important. And so sometimes you have to communicate why what they're doing is important. You have to communicate or invite them in. And you have to take the growing pains of teaching them or training them, which can be a little bit longer in the short run. But then if you can set up processes and get them to train the replacement in the future and start to build more of a system, it's going to be amazing for you in the long run. But I think it starts with some honest conversations, Brandon.
Well, Melissa, I want to thank you for joining us today. Really interesting conversation in terms of looking at all of the ways to build a board and strengthen a board. Melissa's information is up here. I know we'll get this slide and we'll be able to share this in the recording, so you can go back and watch and go through this information again. Melissa's also going to be part of the Sports Philanthropy World Conference coming up. Caitlin's going to drop the link to that into the chat, so you can go see and keep track of the upcoming presentations and speakers and everything going on. And I think that was a great ending point, Melissa, because it's so many organizations struggle to grow, and you can't grow with one person. We're fortunate at Sports Philanthropy Network. Kayla Bradham, our VP of Community Development, is doing an amazing job. We've got a strong group of interns that are working with us and helping us accomplish everything that we want to. And as you said, it takes a team, and it's important to get everybody the opportunity to develop and grow. It helps the organization grow, it helps the individuals grow, and ultimately it's going to get you closer to accomplishing your mission.
Yeah, Roy, I do have one special offer too. If anybody on the call today wants to shoot me an email, I would be happy to share with them an ebook that we've created called it's Virtual Fundraising, 21 Ideas for Nonprofit Revenue, as our free gift to everybody for joining us today too.
Fantastic. Well, again, Melissa, thank you so much for your time. For everybody else that joined us, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. We hope you'll take a look at that link that Caitlin put in the chat for Sports Philanthropy World. We've got 7 program tracks, some amazing main stage speakers and keynotes and fireside chats, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody there. Have a great day. Thank you.